My name is Maya, and I am 29 years old. I never told my parents that my adoptive father was a state Supreme Court judge. To them, I was just the family loser, the quiet data nerd they could step all over. So when my golden child brother hit a man with his car and left him to die in the street, my family did not call an ambulance. They called me. My mother grabbed my shoulders, her nails digging into my skin, and told me to take the blame. My stepfather reminded me that my brother was running for office, and I had absolutely nothing to lose by going to prison. My brother just smirked and asked, "Who would ever believe a nobody like me?" But they forgot one crucial detail. You cannot outsmart the person who built the digital systems you are trying to hide in. That was the very last mistake they ever made. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family, and stay tuned to hear how I made them lose absolutely everything. Growing up in an upscale suburb of Atlanta, my mother Vivian and my stepfather Desmond were obsessed with one thing: respectability. They wanted to be the pinnacle of Black excellence in our city. To the outside world, they were the perfect, wealthy, influential family. Inside our sprawling mansion, however, the reality was suffocating. Their entire universe revolved around my older half-brother, Darius. Darius was 32 years old, impossibly handsome, incredibly charismatic, and currently the front-runner for a seat on the city council. I was the dark stain on their perfect portrait. It was a humid Friday evening, and my parents were hosting a massive campaign fundraiser for Darius at their multi-million-dollar estate. The driveway was packed with luxury cars. Inside, the jazz band was playing, champagne was flowing, and the city elite were mingling. But behind the scenes, it was a disaster. My parents, despite all their performative wealth, were incredibly cheap. They had refused to hire enough catering staff for the event. Instead of enjoying the party, I was frantically running back and forth from the kitchen to the main hall, balancing trays of appetizers and collecting empty glasses. I was wearing a cheap gray blaze I had bought on clearance, sweating under the heavy chandelier lights while my brother glided through the room in a custom-tailored tuxedo, soaking up the praise and adoration of potential donors. I was rushing towards the kitchen with a stack of dirty plates when she blocked my path. Chloe, my 3-0-year-old sister-in-law. Chloe came from a Nouveau-Riche family and wore her wealth like a weapon. She had a custom designer gown that swept the floor, her hair perfectly pressed diamonds glittering on her neck. She despised me, and the feeling was mutual. She stepped directly into my path, holding a full glass of red wine. I tried to pivot, but she purposely leaned forward and tipped her glass. The dark red liquid splashed directly down the front of my gray blazer, soaking through the thin fabric and staining my white blouse underneath. I gasped, nearly dropping the plates. Chloe did not even flinch. She let out a dramatic fake gasp and casually wiped a stray drop of wine from her own manicured finger. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I am so sorry, Maya. I did not see you there. You really blend into the background." "Well, at least you are used to cleaning up after us. Go fetch some club soda, sweetie, and try not to drip on the Persian rug." A few guests turned to look their faces, showing mild amusement before they returned to their conversations. My face burned with humiliation. I wanted to scream at her, but I knew exactly how that would play out. I would be the angry, bitter sister ruining the golden boy's big night. So, I bit my tongue, turned on my heel, and marched straight into the kitchen, the wet fabric clinging uncomfortably to my chest. I grabbed a towel and began scrubbing fiercely at the stain when the heavy wooden doors of the kitchen swung shut, locking out the sound of the jazz band. I turned around to find my mother, Vivian, and my stepfather, Desmond, standing there. They did not look concerned about my ruined clothes. They looked calculated. Desmond stepped forward and slid a thick stack of legal documents across the granite island. "Maya, we need to handle some family business right now," he said, his voice completely devoid of warmth. I looked down at the papers. It was a secondary mortgage application. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Your brother's campaign is in the final stretch," Desmond explained, tapping the paper. "We need a massive final push for television advertisements to secure the win. We are liquidating some assets, but we need more capital immediately. We have prepared the paperwork for you to take out a second mortgage on your condo. The funds will be transferred directly to the campaign account. All you have to do is sign on the last page." I stared at him in utter disbelief. My condo was a tiny one-bedroom unit in a much less glamorous part of town. I had saved for years from my salary as a data forensic specialist to afford the down payment. It was the only thing in the world that was truly mine. "You want me to mortgage my home for Darius?" I asked, my voice rising in shock. "No, absolutely not. I cannot afford that debt, and you have no right to ask me to risk my only safety net." My mother stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with that familiar, terrifying disdain. She crossed her arms, the diamonds on her wrists, catching the harsh kitchen light. "Do not be so selfish, Maya." She scoffed, her tone laced with absolute venom. "Darius is going to be a city councilman. He is the future of Black excellence in this city. He is building a legacy that will elevate this entire family. And what exactly are you doing? You are a data nerd staring at computer screens all day in a tiny, depressing apartment. You bring zero prestige to this family." Her words hit exactly where she intended them to. She always knew how to make me feel completely worthless. "You owe us." She continued stepping closer until I could smell her expensive perfume. "You owe this family for taking you in and keeping you around after that broke loser who raised you abandoned ship." My chest tightened. She was talking about my adoptive father, the man she had dumped 20 years ago because he was a modest public defender at the time, someone she deemed not ambitious enough for her elite aspirations. She had no idea what he had become because I never told them. But using him to manipulate me was a new low. "I do not owe you my home," I said firmly, standing my ground. "I am not signing anything." The kitchen door slammed open again. Darius stormed in his charming public smile, completely gone, replaced by a mask of raw fury. He must have been listening outside. "What is the problem in here?" Darius demanded, marching straight up to me. He kicked a wooden bar stool out of his way, the violent crash making me jump back. "She is refusing to sign," Desmond said, crossing his arms. Darius glared down at me. "You really think you have a choice?" he sneered, invading my personal space. "I need that money by Monday. If you do not sign those papers tonight, I will personally make sure your credit is destroyed. I have friends at your bank. I have friends in your building management. I will ruin you, Maya. Do not test me." The sheer entitlement radiating from him was suffocating. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to intervene, to protect me from my brother's unhinged threats. But she just stared at me silently, agreeing with every word he said. I had nothing left to say to any of them. I grabbed my purse from the counter, snatched my car keys, and pushed past my brother. I walked straight out the back door of the kitchen, not caring that a massive thunderstorm had just broken over the city. The cold rain instantly soaked my hair and washed over my ruined wine-stained blazer. I climbed into my modest sedan, locking the doors with shaking hands, leaving my toxic family seething in their mansion. The tension in my chest was almost unbearable, but the real nightmare, the true horror that would alter the course of all our lives, was just a few short hours away from me now. I drove back to my apartment, with the rain lashing against my windshield, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. I kept replaying the look of utter disdain on my mother's face. I stripped off my ruined clothes the second I got inside, throwing the wine-stained blazer into the trash. I did not even bother turning on the lights. I just collapsed onto my sofa, wrapping a blanket around my shivering shoulders, trying to convince myself that the worst was over. I managed to drift into a restless, heavy sleep. Fast forward to 2:00 the morning. I was violently jolted awake by the sound of frantic pounding on my front door. It was not a normal knock. It sounded like someone was trying to break the door off its hinges. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stumbled through the dark living room, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. I looked through the peephole, and my breath hitched in my throat. It was Darius. He was leaning heavily against the doorframe, his head hanging down. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Darius pushed past me so hard that I stumbled backward into the wall. He slammed the door shut behind him and threw the deadbolt, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. The sharp, sour stench of premium bourbon and cheap cologne rolled off him in waves. But that was not what made my stomach drop. His custom-tailored tuxedo shirt, the one he had been wearing just hours ago while charming donors, was ripped at the collar and soaked with fresh dark blood. "Darius," that I whispered, stepping back. "What happened to you? Are you hurt?" He paced my tiny living room like a caged animal, running his hands over his face, smearing a streak of blood across his cheek. "I messed up, Maya," he stammered, his charismatic political voice entirely gone, replaced by the panicked babble of a terrified child. I messed up so bad. My life is over. My campaign is over. I tried to approach him, my hands raised to calm him down. Calm down and tell me what happened. Where are you bleeding from? Let me call an ambulance. I reached for my phone on the coffee table, but he slapped it out of my hand. The phone clattered across the floor. Do not call anyone, he yelled, his eyes wide and bloodshot. I am not hurt. It is not my blood. The room felt like it was shrinking. I looked at the blood on his shirt, then up at his panicked face. Whose blood is it, Darius? He grabbed his hair, tugging at the roots. I had your car. I took your car last week, and I never gave it back. I left the fundraiser to go to an after-party. I had a few drinks. Just a few drinks, Maya. I swear I did not see him. The streetlights were out on 4th Avenue, and he just stepped right out in front of me. My legs felt like they were made of lead. Who did you hit, Darius? He looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. It was Reverend Thomas. I hit Reverend Thomas. He went over the hood. There was so much blood, Maya. He was not moving. I panicked. I just panicked and drove away. A wave of absolute nausea washed over me. Reverend Thomas was a pillar of the Black community in Atlanta. He had marched for civil rights. He ran the largest food bank in the district, and everyone loved him. And my brother had just mowed him down in my car while driving drunk and left him to die in the rain. We have to call the police, I said, my voice shaking with raw terror. We have to call an ambulance right now. Maybe he is still alive, Darius. We have to tell them it was an accident. Before Darius could answer, a key turned in my lock. My heart leapt into my throat. Only 2 other people had a spare key to my apartment. The door swung open, and my mother Vivian and my stepfather Desmond rushed inside. They were completely soaked from the rain. They did not look panicked. They looked incredibly focused, operating with a cold, terrifying efficiency. Desmond immediately locked the door behind them and pulled the curtains shut. Vivian marched straight up to Darius and grabbed his face, inspecting the blood on his shirt. Are you hurt? She asked him, her voice brisk and demanding. No, Mom, he whimpered. It is the Reverend's blood. I checked his pulse before I ran. I stood there waiting for my mother to react with horror, waiting for her to pull out her phone and call 911 to save the man bleeding out on the street. Instead, she turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were completely empty of maternal warmth. She looked at me the way a general looks at a pawn on a chessboard. She walked over to me and grabbed my shoulders. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my skin so hard that I could feel them piercing through my thin cotton shirt. Listen to me, Maya. She hissed, her voice dangerously low. Darius has a wife. He has a campaign. He has a legacy to build for this family. The city needs him. He cannot go to prison for a tragic accident. I tried to pull away, but her grip was like a vice. What are you saying? I cried out. He hit a man. He drove drunk and left a dying man in the street. Desmond stepped up right behind her, towering over me. He crossed his massive arms. We are saying that you are going to take the blame, Maya. You are going to call the police right now and tell them you were driving. You will tell them you went out for a drive after the party because you were upset. You had a few drinks. You panicked when you hit the Reverend and you drove home. I stared at them, my brain refusing to process the sheer evil of their demand. You want me to confess to a hit and run? I asked, my voice cracking. You want me to go to prison for him? You have absolutely nothing to lose? Desmond said, his tone horribly calm and rational. Think about it, Maya. You have no husband. You have no children. You live in this pathetic apartment and work a dead-end tech job. You are a nobody. If Darius goes down, the entire family's reputation is destroyed. Everything we have built, our entire standing in the Black elite community will be gone overnight. We will hire the most expensive defense attorney in the state for you. We will say you have an alcohol problem and get you a light sentence. My mother squeezed my shoulders even tighter, giving me a violent shake. Do this for your family, Maya. It is the only way you will ever be of any real use to us. The sheer audacity, the absolute sociopathic cruelty of their plan finally snapped me out of my shock. I shoved my mother backward, breaking her grip on me. You are both insane, I screamed, backing away from them. I am not taking the fall for this. I am not going to prison because your precious golden child decided to drink and drive. I am calling the police, and I am telling them exactly what happened. I lunged toward the kitchen counter to grab my spare phone. Desmond was faster. He lunged forward and slammed his heavy hand down on the device, shattering the screen against the granite countertop. "Do not be stupid, Maya," he warned, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. I turned to look at my brother, hoping to find a shred of guilt or humanity left in him. But the panicked boy from 10 minutes ago was gone. Watching our parents fiercely protect him had restored his arrogant confidence. Darius stood up straight, wiping the smear of blood off his cheek with the back of his hand. He looked at me and actually smirked. "Who do you think the cops will believe, Maya?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "The beloved up-and-coming city council candidate with a pristine record, or the resentful single sister who lives in the slums and caused a scene at his fundraiser just hours ago?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of black leather driving gloves. "I wore these the whole time," he continued, his smirk widening into a cruel smile. "I wiped down the steering wheel before I left the car in your parking lot. I made sure my fingerprints are nowhere to be found. Your car, your keys, your problem." Desmond reached into his own pocket, pulled out my car keys, which were smeared with Reverend Thomas's blood, and tossed them casually onto my coffee table. They landed with a heavy metallic clink that echoed in the quiet room. "We are leaving now," Vivian said, adjusting her designer raincoat. "The police should be here any minute. Someone reported the accident and gave them the license plate number. Do the right thing, Maya. Play the victim, act remorseful, and we will take care of the lawyer. If you try to drag your brother down, we will testify that you stole the car, and we will make sure the judge gives you the maximum sentence." They turned around and walked out of my apartment, the door clicking shut behind them. I was left completely alone, standing in the dark, staring at the bloody keys on my table. My own mother and stepfather had just framed me for a felony to save their favorite child. They had handed me over to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. The room started to spin. I felt like I could not breathe. I looked out my living room window and saw the red and blue flashing lights reflecting off the wet pavement down the street. The distant wail of police sirens cut through the sound of the rain growing louder and more urgent by the second. They were coming for me. My family had set the trap perfectly, and there was absolutely no way out. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sirens were deafening now. They were pulling into my apartment complex. I looked down at my hands, shaking violently. I had done nothing wrong, but I was about to lose my freedom, my career, and my entire life. The realization settled over me like a suffocating blanket. The people who were supposed to love and protect me had just signed my death warrant. I heard heavy boots pounding up the exterior stairwell, followed by a loud, aggressive banging on my front door. "Police, open up." I stood there paralyzed as the banging grew louder, knowing that my life as I knew it was officially over. The heavy boots pounded against the wood again, followed by a splintering crack that echoed through my small living room. Before I could even raise my hands, the front door burst open, the deadbolt tearing entirely through the doorframe. Half a dozen police officers swarmed into my apartment, their flashlights cutting through the darkness and blinding me. They were shouting conflicting orders, their voices overlapping in a chaotic blur of aggression. "Get on the ground. Show me your hands. Do not move." I froze, terrified that any sudden movement would give them an excuse to shoot. A large officer lunged forward, grabbing my shoulder and slamming me violently against the hallway wall. The impact knocked the breath out of my lungs. He kicked my legs apart and yanked my arms behind my back, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting viciously into my wrists. I cried out in pain, begging them to listen to me. I was not driving. I screamed over the chaos of their radios. It was my brother, Darius. He was just here. His shirt was covered in blood. He took my car. The officers completely ignored me. Two of them were already tossing my living room, kicking over my coffee table, and seizing the bloody car keys Desmond had strategically left behind. Another officer shined his flashlight directly into my eyes, sneering at me. "Save it for the judge," he barked, shoving me toward the front door. "We got an anonymous tip about a hit-and-run suspect matching your vehicle and your description." It hit me like a physical blow. Desmond. He had called it in the second he and my mother walked out of my apartment, making sure the police arrived. Before I even had a chance to process what was happening, they dragged me out into the pouring rain, parading me in front of my neighbors, who were now peering through their blinds. I was shoved into the back of a freezing patrol car, my clothes still damp from my earlier escape from the fundraiser. I was processed at the local precinct like a hardened criminal. They took my fingerprints, photographed my tear-stained face, and confiscated my personal belongings. Then they threw me into a holding cell at the end of a long fluorescent-lit corridor. The cell was agonizingly cold, smelling heavily of bleach and despair. I sat on the rigid metal bench, wrapping my arms around my shivering body, praying that this was all a terrible misunderstanding that would be sorted out the moment a detective reviewed the facts. Surely they would test the steering wheel for fingerprints. Surely they would check the security cameras around my apartment complex and see Darius arriving in a panic. But my naive hope evaporated the moment. Detective Griggs walked into the room. He was a broad-shouldered man with a thick neck and a casual, arrogant stroll. He carried a manila folder which he tossed carelessly onto the metal table before sitting across from me. He did not look like a man searching for the truth. He looked like a man who had already been paid to ignore it. I immediately leaned forward, the handcuffs rattling against the table. "Detective, you have to listen." I pleaded my voice. My brother Darius was driving my car. He took it last week. He came to my apartment an hour ago wearing a blood-soaked tuxedo shirt. My mother and stepfather came right after him. They forced their way in and told me I had to take the blame because of his political campaign. "You have to test his clothes. You have to check the cameras." Griggs leaned back in his chair, watching me with a blank, unreadable expression. He reached over to the recording device sitting on the table and deliberately pressed the power button. The small red light blinked off. He steepled his fingers, staring at me with a sickeningly calm demeanor. "Desmond sends his regards," Griggs said softly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The blood drained from my face. My heart stopped beating for a full second. Griggs leaned closer, invading my space, smelling of stale coffee and peppermint gum. "Sign the confession, sweetheart," he told me, tapping the manila folder. "Your brother is a good man. He is doing important things for this city. Do not drag him down just because you are jealous of his success. You had a little too much to drink. You took your car for a spin and you made a mistake. It happens. We can make this easy for you, or we can make it very, very hard." I stared at him, absolute horror washing over me. The rot went so much deeper than my toxic family. Desmond was a powerful man in the local black elite circle, a wealthy developer who donated heavily to the police union and local political campaigns. He had bought this precinct. He had bought this detective. They were not going to investigate Darius. They were actively helping my parents frame me. I shook my head, refusing to touch the pen he slid across the table. "I am not signing anything," I whispered, my voice trembling with defiant rage. "I want a lawyer." Griggs just chuckled a low, menacing sound. "Suit yourself," he said, standing up and grabbing the folder. "But do not say nobody tried to help you." He walked out, slamming the heavy steel door behind him, leaving me completely isolated in the freezing room. Hours passed. The sheer terror of my situation began to suffocate me. I was entirely cut off from the outside world, trapped in a system that had already decided my guilt. Finally, the heavy door groaned open again. A man in a rumpled cheap suit walked in carrying a battered briefcase. He introduced himself as my court-appointed public defender. He looked utterly exhausted, his tie slightly askew, dark circles bruising his eyes. He sat down heavily across from me and immediately began pulling out paperwork, refusing to even look me in the eye. I felt a tiny surge of hope. "Please," I begged him. "You have to help me. My stepfather is Desmond Caldwell, the real estate developer. He is framing me to protect his son. The detective here is working for him. You have to request a blood test for my brother." The lawyer held up a hand, stopping my frantic plea. He kept his gaze firmly fixed on the documents spread out before him. "Listen to me very carefully, Maya," he said, his voice flat and robotic. "The district attorney has a rockalid case against you. They have your car. They have the keys found in your apartment. They have an anonymous witness placing you at the scene. And the victim, Reverend Thomas, is currently in a coma. If he dies, they are upgrading the charge to vehicular homicide." He finally glanced up at me, and I saw a flash of profound guilt in his eyes before he quickly looked away again. "The DA is offering a plea deal." He continued sliding a paper toward me. "Vehicular manslaughter, 5 years in state prison, eligible for parole in 3. I advise you to take it. If you fight this in front of a jury, they will bury you. The judge will give you 20 years maximum." I stared at the paper, then at the lawyer. "You have not even looked at the evidence," I said, my voice dropping to a stunned whisper. "You have not asked me a single question about my defense." He nervously adjusted his collar, refusing to meet my gaze. "I am telling you what is best for your future," he mumbled. "Take the deal." It hit me then, a realization so cold and sharp it felt like a knife slipping between my ribs. Desmond had gotten to him, too. Or perhaps the corrupt local system simply knew better than to cross a wealthy political donor. The public defender was not here to defend me. He was here to deliver me to the slaughterhouse. He was part of the machine designed to crush me into submission. I pushed the paper back across the table. "I will not plead guilty to a crime I did not commit," I said, my voice steadying with a quiet, dangerous resolve. "Get out." The lawyer hastily gathered his papers, looking almost relieved to be dismissed. He hurried out of the interrogation room, leaving me alone once again. I was escorted back to the dark holding cell. The heavy iron bars slid shut with a resounding clang echoing down the empty corridor. I sat on the edge of the metal cot, pulling my knees to my chest to conserve body heat. The concrete walls seemed to close in on me, pressing the oxygen out of the small, foul-smelling space. The physical cold was nothing compared to the freezing realization settling into my bones. My owner, the woman who gave birth to me, had engineered my destruction. She had looked me in the eye and decided that my life was an acceptable sacrifice to protect her golden child. She and Desmond had mobilized their wealth, their political influence, and their connections within the black elite to build a flawless, inescapable trap. They had bought the police. They had compromised my legal repertoire. They had ensured that I was entirely isolated, stripped of my voice, and left to rot in a cage. To them, I was exactly what they had always called me, the family loser, an expendable pawn. I closed my eyes as a single tear escaped, charting a hot path down my freezing cheek. I thought about the thousands of innocent people crushed by this exact same corrupt system. People who lacked the resources or the knowledge to fight back against wealthy, connected predators. My family was counting on my despair. They were waiting for me to break, to cry, to sign the confession out of sheer, overwhelming hopelessness. They thought I was just a weak, isolated data analyst who would quietly accept her fate to spare the family legacy. I sat in the darkness, shivering, allowing the terror to wash over me for one final moment. But as the minutes ticked by, the fear began to recede, replaced by a dark, consuming fury. They had miscalculated. They thought I was defenseless. They did not realize that by trapping me in a corner with absolutely nothing left to lose, they had just unleashed a monster. My mind began to race, calculating every variable, analyzing every piece of digital data I knew existed in the world. I was a data forensics specialist. I hunted ghosts for a living. I tracked digital footprints that criminals thought they had erased forever. Desmond and Darius had carefully orchestrated a physical cover-up, but they were arrogant, technologically illiterate men. They had no idea what kind of digital trail a modern vehicle leaves behind. They had no idea what kind of security protocols were embedded in the very car they had used to frame me. I wiped the tear from my cheek, my posture straightening on the rigid metal bench. The S evaporated, leaving behind a cold, calculating determination. I was not going to let them destroy my life. I was not going to rot in a cell so my brother could stand on a podium and preach about community values. I was going to dismantle their entire empire piece by piece, bite by bite. I would expose their corruption, shatter their pristine image, and watch them beg for the mercy they had denied me. And I was going to enjoy every single second of it. Let them enjoy their temporary victory, I thought, staring at the barred window of my cell. The game had not even started yet. Morning crept into the holding cell, not with sunlight, but with the harsh buzzing of fluorescent tubes flickering to life. My bones ached from the rigid metal bench. The night had been a blur of cold, concrete rattling iron doors and the chilling realization of my family's ultimate betrayal. I sat up, wrapping my arms around my knees, listening to the heavy boots of the guards echoing down the corridor. A corrections officer dragged a wheeled television cart into the common area just outside my cell bars. He turned the volume up, likely hoping the morning broadcast would drown out the moans and shuffling of the other inmates. I did not want to watch. I wanted to focus on my plan to access my car's telematic system, but then the local news anchor's voice caught my attention, freezing the blood in my veins. We begin this morning with breaking news out of the 4th District. The anchor announced his expression appropriately grim. Reverend Thomas, a beloved community leader and lifelong civil rights advocate, is currently in critical condition at Memorial Hospital following a horrific hit-and-run accident late last night. The screen flashed a picture of the Reverend. He was smiling warmly, standing outside his local food bank. My stomach turned violently. Darius had not just hit a random pedestrian. He had struck down a pillar of our community, a man who had dedicated his entire life to uplifting the very people Desmond and Vivian pretended to champion. The anchor continued detailing the severity of the Reverend's injuries: multiple fractures, internal bleeding, a severe traumatic brain injury. He was clinging to life on a ventilator. The guilt I felt was suffocating, even though I was completely innocent. My car had done this. My brother had done this just moments ago, the anchor said, shifting his papers. The family of the alleged driver held a press conference on the steps of the hospital. The broadcast cut to a live feed. My breath hitched. There they were. Darius and Chloe stood behind a cluster of microphones flanked by Desmond and Vivian, who stood slightly behind them like mournful shadows. They had orchestrated this perfectly. Darius was wearing a dark, conservative suit, his face a mask of profound sorrow. But it was Chloe who stepped up to the podium. She was dressed in a modest black dress, her usually vibrant makeup toned down to make her look pale and distressed. She clutched a designer tissue in one hand. "Good morning," Chloe began, her voice quivering with a perfectly rehearsed fragility. "Our family is absolutely devastated by the tragic events of last night. First and foremost, we ask for the city's prayers for Reverend Thomas. He is a saint among men, and our hearts are completely shattered for him and his congregation." She paused to dab at the corner of her eye with the tissue. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I gripped the iron bars of my cell, my knuckles turning white. "Unfortunately," Chloe continued, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper of shame, "we must address the painful truth regarding the driver responsible for this tragedy. My sister-in-law, Maya, has struggled with deep-seated jealousy and severe substance abuse for many years. We have tried everything as a family to get her the help she so desperately needs. We paid for programs. We offered constant support. But last night, in a tragic state of intoxication, she took her car and made a choice that has ruined lives." I screamed at the television, but the thick plexiglass and iron bars swallowed the sound. She was painting me as a volatile addict. She was building a narrative that justified my isolation. By framing my independence as rebellion and my quiet nature as secret addiction, they were weaponizing respectability politics against me. Darius stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Chloe's shoulder. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes shining with fake tears. "I love my sister," Darius lied smoothly, "but justice must be served. We are cooperating fully with the police. We pray for the Reverend, and we pray Maya finally finds God in prison. We ask for privacy during this incredibly difficult time for our family." They stepped away from the microphones, burying their faces in their hands as the press clamored for more questions. The broadcast cut back to the news desk. The anchors shook their heads, their expressions filled with sympathetic disgust. "A truly heartbreaking situation," the anchor murmured. "The community reaction has been swift and overwhelming. Social media is flooded with outrage this morning. Reverend Thomas is a father figure to thousands in this city, and the betrayal felt by the Black community is palpable." The screen displayed a montage of social media posts. The vitriol was entirely directed at me. Local organizers were calling for the maximum sentence. People who had never met me were wishing me death. My family had successfully channeled the collective grief and fury of an entire city directly onto my shoulders. They had effectively assassinated my character in front of millions of people. If I ever stepped foot out of this jail, I would be a pariah. I would be the monster who ran down Reverend Thomas. A guard struck his baton against the bars of my cell, making me jump. "You get one phone call," he grunted, unlocking the heavy door. "Make it quick." He escorted me down the hall to a bank of wall-mounted telephones. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. I did not call my family. There was no point. I needed an ally on the outside, someone who could secure my employment and perhaps connect me with a corporate attorney who could not be bought by Desmond. I dialed the direct line to my boss, Mr. Sterling. The phone rang 4 times. I prayed he had not seen the news yet. Sterling, his crisp voice, answered. "Mr. Sterling, it is Maya," I said, rushing the words out. "I am so sorry to call you so early, but I am in a desperate situation. I have been wrongfully arrested. My family is framing me for an accident I did not commit. I need the company's legal department to help me. I can explain everything." There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was entirely stripped of the professional warmth we had shared just yesterday. "Maya Human Resources has already processed your termination paperwork," he said coldly. I felt the floor drop out from under me. "What? No, please. You have to listen to me. I am innocent. The data on my car will prove it. I cannot listen to you," Maya Sterling replied, his tone sharp and absolute. "Your sister-in-law's press conference has been playing on every news network for the last hour. Our firm holds sensitive government contracts. We have strict morality clauses in our employment agreements. We cannot afford the optics of employing someone at the center of a malicious, high-profile vehicular assault against a beloved community leader. Mr. Sterling, they are lying." I pleaded, tears finally spilling over my eyelashes. "You know my work ethic. You know I do not have a substance abuse problem. Please just give me a few days to clear my name. Your company access has been revoked." He continued, completely ignoring my desperation. "A box with your personal desk items will be mailed to your apartment on file. I have been advised by our legal team to end this communication immediately. Do not contact this office again." The line went dead. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a flatline. I slowly lowered the receiver to the cradle. In less than 12 hours, my mother and stepfather had meticulously engineered my absolute destruction. I had lost my physical freedom to a corrupt police department. I had lost my reputation to a viciously calculated media smear campaign. And now I had lost the livelihood I had spent years sacrificing everything to build. The independent life I had forged away from their toxic shadow was completely obliterated. The guard grabbed my arm, yanking me away from the phone bank. "Time is up," he barked, shoving me back down the corridor toward my holding cell. I stumbled forward, my vision blurring. The walls of the precinct felt like they were physically closing in, crushing the last remaining breath from my lungs. Desmond and Vivian had stripped away every single resource I possessed. They wanted me entirely dependent on their mercy, a mercy that required me to sign a confession and spend the best years of my life behind bars. They thought that by destroying my job and turning the city against me, I would have no choice but to surrender to their demands. I sat back down on the freezing metal cot as the heavy iron door slammed shut. The isolation was absolute. But as the panic threatened to swallow me whole, a cold, hard knot of defiance formed in the pit of my stomach. They had taken my job, my reputation, and my freedom, but they did not know about the emergency offshore account my adoptive father had taught me to hide. They did not know about the encrypted laptop stashed under my floorboards, and they certainly did not know that by taking everything away from me, they had removed every reason I had left to play nice. The smear campaign was their opening move. Now it was my turn to play. The guard's heavy boots echoed against the concrete floor as he marched me away from the phone bank. My mind was still reeling from the cold, clinical voice of my boss firing me over the phone. I expected to be thrown right back into the freezing holding cell, left to rot in my damp clothes. Instead, the guard grabbed my upper arm and steered me down a different, slightly brighter corridor. He told me I had a visitor. My heart gave a pathetic, traitorous flutter. A tiny, irrational part of my brain thought perhaps my mother had come to her senses. Perhaps she had seen the news, seen the absolute destruction of my life, and felt a shred of maternal guilt. Perhaps she was coming to tell me they were going to fix this. I should have known better. The visitor room was a stark, depressing space divided by thick, smudged plexiglass. The air smelled of cheap disinfectant and sweat. I sat down on the bolted metal stool, the bright orange fabric of my J-Lassoed jumpsuit scratching against my skin. I looked through the glass and felt the last remaining ounce of hope drain from my body. My mother, Vivian, was sitting on the other side. The contrast between us was so extreme, it almost felt comical. I was shivering, stripped of my dignity, my hair messy, and my spirit crushed. Vivian looked immaculate. She was wearing a pristine white cashmere coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, and a perfectly matched pearl necklace rested against her collarbone. Her makeup was flawless. Not a single hair was out of place. She did not look like a mother visiting her wrongfully accused daughter in jail. She looked like a CEO arriving to finalize a hostile corporate takeover. She did not offer a warm greeting. She did not ask if I was okay or if they were treating me decently. She simply reached into her designer leather handbag, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slid it through the narrow metal slot at the bottom of the plexiglass partition. It landed on the metal counter in front of me with a soft whisper. I stared at the paper, then slowly looked up at her face. Her eyes were completely void of any emotion. "Read it," she commanded, her voice steady and perfectly modulated. I unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. It was a typed legal document, a full comprehensive confession. It stated that I had taken the car without permission, consumed multiple alcoholic beverages at a local bar, struck Reverend Thomas, and fled the scene in a panic. It absolved Darius of any involvement whatsoever. It was a complete fabrication, neatly packaged in dense legal jargon, waiting only for my signature at the bottom. I looked back up at her, my throat tight. "You want me to sign this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vivian leaned forward, resting her manicured hands on the counter. "Sign it, Maya. This is the only way forward. If you try to take this to trial, you will lose. Desmond has already spoken to his contacts in the district attorney's office. They are ready to make an example out of you to appease the public. If you try to drag Darius down with you, Desmond will ensure the judge gives you the maximum sentence. They will lock you away for 20 years. She paused, letting the threat settle in the stale air between us. "But if you sign it," she continued, her tone, softening just a fraction to simulate sympathy, "we will take care of you. We will hire the best defense attorney in the state to negotiate a plea deal. We will say you have an addiction problem and plead for leniency. I will personally put $50,000 in a commissary account for you. You will have whatever you need while you serve your time. Just do this for the family, Maya. Do it for Black excellence. We cannot let a scandal destroy everything Desmond and I have built. We cannot let the community lose a leader like Darius." I sat frozen, listening to her twist my destruction into some kind of noble sacrifice for the greater good. She was actually trying to convince me that going to prison for my brother's violent, drunken crime was a service to our race and our family legacy. The sheer audacity of her manipulation was breathtaking. She was sitting in a jailhouse wearing pearls purchased with Desmond's corrupt money, asking me to throw away my entire future so my brother could continue wearing custom suits and shaking hands with donors. I placed my hands flat on the metal table to stop them from shaking. I looked directly into the eyes of the woman who had given birth to me. The woman who had left my adoptive father 20 years ago because he drove a used car and worked a modest government job. I needed to know the absolute truth without any filters or political spin. "Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm, "if the roles were reversed, if I was the one running for city council and Darius was the one working a desk job in a tiny apartment, would you let Darius go to prison for me?" Vivian did not blink. She did not look away, and she did not hesitate for a single second. Her face remained a perfect, unreadable mask. "Darius actually matters to the world. Maya," she said, her voice completely flat, "he has a wife. He has a platform. He has power. You are just surviving. It is not about who I love more. It is about return on investment. Darius is the crown jewel of this family. You are collateral damage." Hearing her say it out loud did not break me. It did exactly the opposite. Something inside my chest snapped, but it was not a breakdown. It was the heavy, rusted chains of a lifetime of seeking her approval finally breaking apart. The scared, desperate little girl who just wanted her mother to love her evaporated into the cold, sterile air of the visitation room. In her place, a profound, icy clarity took over. The tears dried up instantly. My breathing steadied. I realized I was no longer speaking to my mother. I was speaking to an adversary. I picked up the confession paper. I did not tear it up or throw it. I calmly and meticulously folded it back into a neat square and slid it right back through the metal slot. "Keep your $50,000, Vivian," I said, my voice so cold and detached that she actually flinched. "I am not signing anything. I am not going to prison for your golden child, and I am never speaking to you again." Vivian stared at the returned paper, her perfect composure finally shattering. Her face twisted into a mask of ugly, venomous rage. She stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the linoleum floor. She leaned close to the glass, her eyes burning with pure hatred. "Then rot," she hissed, her voice vibrating with malice. "Rot in here, Maya. Because when we are done with you, you will not have a single friend, a single dollar, or a single shred of dignity left in this world." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the visitor room, her cashmere coat billowing behind her. I sat there in the silence, feeling lighter than I had in my entire life. The guard came to escort me back to my cell. When we reached the corridor, I stopped and looked at him. I am legally entitled to contact a bail bondsman, and I told him, projecting an authority I did not know I possessed. I demand access to a telephone. He grunted, probably assuming I was just going to beg another family member, and pointed me toward the wall phone. He had no idea what I was about to do. I picked up the receiver and dialed a very specific, memorized international number. While Vivian and Desmond thought I was just a broke data analyst living paycheck to paycheck, they had vastly underestimated the lessons my adoptive father had taught me before they cut him out of my life. He had always warned me about the unpredictable nature of the world. He taught me to build a fortress. Over the last decade, living incredibly frugally, working side contracts and utilizing my deep knowledge of digital finance, I had amassed a massive emergency fund in a highly secure offshore account. It was my absolute safety net, completely invisible to the local banking system and entirely untouchable by Desmond. The line connected. I spoke to a discreet, high-end bail bonding agency that specialized in handling wealthy, high-profile clients who needed rapid, unquestioned service. I provided my account routing numbers and authorized the immediate transfer of funds. The agent on the phone confirmed the transaction. My bail was set at an exorbitant amount designed by Desmond's corrupt judge friends to keep me locked up. I paid the entire sum in cash instantly. 3 hours later, the heavy iron door of my cell swung open. The guards looked genuinely shocked as they processed my release paperwork. They handed me a plastic bag containing my ruined damp clothes and my shattered cell phone. I changed out of the orange jumpsuit in a small dingy bathroom, feeling the wet, cold fabric of my blouse stick to my skin. It did not matter. I was free. I signed the final release documents and walked toward the heavy glass double doors of the precinct lobby. I could see them waiting outside, the paparazzi, the local news crews, the angry community members holding up signs demanding justice for Reverend Thomas. Chloe and Desmond had clearly tipped off the press about my release time, hoping to subject me to a terrifying public walk of shame. They wanted me to walk out of those doors, crying, covering my face, looking exactly like the guilty broken addict they had described on television. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped out into the blinding swarm of camera flashes and screaming reporters. Microphones were shoved into my face. People shouted horrible, vicious insults demanding to know why I ran down a man of God. I did not flinch. I did not cover my face. I kept my head down just enough to avoid the blinding glare of the camera lights, walking with a steady, measured pace through the hostile crowd. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was a predator who had just been let off the leash, and I was going to systematically dismantle their entire empire. The paparazzi swarmed me like vultures, shoving their microphones into my face and screaming accusations. I kept my head down, my expression completely blank, and pushed my way through the hostile mob. I did not engage. I did not defend myself. I just kept walking until I reached the main avenue and flagged down a passing taxi. I handed the driver a $50 bill and told him to drive toward the financial district. I knew Desmond had eyes everywhere, and I could not risk leading his people to my actual destination. I switched cabs 3 separate times, weaving through different boroughs of Atlanta, making sure my digital and physical trails were completely cold. My final stop was a 2-4-hour fitness center on the edge of the city limits. I walked inside, paid a daily guest fee in cash, and went straight to the locker room. 2 years ago, I had rented a long-term locker under a fake name. Inside was a heavy-duty waterproof duffel bag. It contained clothes, burner phones, untraceable prepaid debit cards, and my most important tool, a Militaria fully encrypted laptop. My adoptive father had taught me to always maintain a shadow existence, a hidden reserve of resources for the exact moment the world decided to turn against me. I changed out of the damp, wrinkled clothes I had been arrested in. Slipping into a plain black hoodie and dark jeans, I grabbed the duffel bag, walked out the back exit of the gym, and walked 2 miles in the freezing rain until I found a run-down cash-only motel. I paid for 3 nights, locked the flimsy wooden door of my room, and pulled the blackout curtains tightly shut. The room smelled of old smoke and cheap air freshener, but to me, it was a war room. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and unzipped the duffel bag. I pulled out the laptop, flipped the screen open, and booted it up. My family had always mocked my profession. They called me a computer nerd. They thought my job consisted of fixing jammed printers or updating spreadsheets. They were blinded by their obsession with titles, prestige, and political power. They entirely underestimated what a data forensic specialist actually does. I do not fix computers. I dissect them. I extract digital ghosts. I build timelines out of microscopic fragments of code that people think they have deleted. Desmond and Darius were arrogant men who believed that power could buy reality. They thought that because they had scrubbed the physical evidence, the crime was erased. They had the steering wheel wiped down. They had the blood cleaned off the leather seats. They had the local police in their pockets. But they were completely technologically illiterate. They did not understand that modern vehicles are essentially massive rolling surveillance devices. My car, the one they had used as a murder weapon, was a late-model sedan equipped with a robust cloud-based telematic system. The vehicle constantly transmitted data back to the manufacturer's central servers. GPS coordinates engine performance, sudden braking events, and cabin audio. It recorded everything. I connected to the motel's spotty internet through a triple-routed virtual private network, masking my location behind servers in Switzerland and Iceland. I cracked my knuckles and went to work. I accessed the dealership network using a backdoor portal I had discovered during a previous corporate security audit. The manufacturer's firewall was strong, designed to keep out amateur hackers and data thieves. But I was not an amateur. I knew the exact vulnerabilities in their authentication protocol. I executed a brute force script that bypassed the secondary security layer, granting me direct, unrestricted access to the master database. I entered my vehicle identification number and hit the enter key. A massive stream of data flooded my screen. I filtered the logs, isolating the exact time frame of the hit and run. The digital breadcrumbs appeared instantly, painting a flawless, irrefutable picture of my brother's movements. I pulled the raw GPS coordinates and mapped them on a secondary monitor. The story the data told was radically different from the lie my family had just sold to the press. The ignition engaged at exactly 9:00 inches the evening, right outside my parents' suburban mansion. The car then drove directly to an upscale lounge in the downtown district. The engine remained off for 3 hours. This proved my car was parked at a bar while I was supposedly home drinking alone. At midnight, the ignition fired up again. The telemetry data showed the car speeding erratically, breaking the speed limit and ignoring traffic signals. Then, the critical moment. The sensors registered a massive, sudden deceleration event on 4th Avenue. The anti-lock brakes engaged forcefully. The collision detection system recorded a heavy impact on the front right bumper. My heart pounded against my ribs. I had the physical location. I had the exact time of the collision. But GPS data alone was not enough. Desmond's high-priced lawyers could argue that I was still the one behind the wheel. I needed to prove identity. I needed the smoking gun. I dug deeper into the vehicle's diagnostic files. I was looking for a very specific hidden feature. Modern cars have an SOS crash response system. When the sensors detect a significant impact, the onboard computer automatically activates a buffered audio recording designed to capture the moments during and immediately after a crash to assist emergency dispatchers. It stores this audio in a hidden cache separate from the main user interface. Darius had absolutely no idea this feature even existed. I located the encrypted audio file buried deep in the system architecture. My hands were shaking as I initiated the decryption sequence. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen, the only light in the dark motel room illuminating my face. The file decrypted successfully. I plugged in a pair of heavy headphones, closed my eyes, and pressed play. The audio quality was incredibly crisp. First, I heard the loud, aggressive roar of the engine accelerating. I could hear the muffled thumping of a hip-hop track playing through the stereo. Then came the sudden, violent screech of tires skidding across wet asphalt. A loud, sickening thud echoed through my headphones. The sound of metal crunching and glass shattering made my stomach churn. It was the exact moment Reverend Thomas was struck down. The car idled loudly. The heavy, panicked breathing of the driver filled the cabin. Then the Bluetooth phone system activated. The driver had initiated an emergency call, but not to the police. The dial tone rang twice before a man answered. Dad. Dad. I hit someone. It was Darius. His voice was frantic, hysterical, completely stripped of his usual arrogant polish. An old man. I just hit an old man on 4th Avenue. I heard Desmond's voice bark through the car's speakers, demanding to know if anyone had seen him. No, I am not stopping. Darius sobbed, his voice rising in sheer panic. "My campaign is over. My life is over. I cannot go to prison." There was a brief pause on the recording. I could hear the rain pelting the windshield. Then the panic in my brother's voice abruptly shifted. The terror hardened into something cold, calculating, and ruthlessly self-preserving. "Dad, I am taking the car to Maya's apartment. We will say the broke stole it. She is a loser anyway. Get Mom and meet me there. We are ending this tonight." The transmission cut out. The audio file ended in a sharp hiss of static. I ripped the headphones off my ears, gasping for air as if I had just been submerged underwater. The sheer, unadulterated evil of that recording echoed in the quiet motel room. My brother had just run over an innocent, beloved community leader, and in the very next breath, he had deliberately and maliciously plotted to destroy my life to save his own political career. He did not hesitate. He did not feel an ounce of remorse. He just saw me as a convenient, disposable piece of trash. A profound, chilling silence settled over me. I did not feel sad. I did not feel betrayed. I felt dangerously powerful. They had crafted a masterful illusion for the public. They had weaponized the media, manipulated the local police force, and convinced an entire city that I was a volatile, jealous monster. But their entire empire was built on a foundation of analog lies. They were playing checkers, and I held the nuclear launch codes. I quickly went to work securing the evidence. I created 3 separate, highly encrypted backups of the GPS data, the telematics logs, and the dashcam audio file. I utilized a fragmented distribution network, splitting the data packets across multiple international nodes to guarantee absolute security. I uploaded the first backup to a secure cloud server hosted in a privacy-shielded data center in Switzerland. I transferred the second backup to an offshore server in the Cayman Islands. I saved the final copy directly onto a physical flash drive, which I immediately tucked into the front pocket of my jeans. The evidence was completely decentralized and totally indestructible. Even if Desmond somehow managed to track me down, even if he sent his corrupt police officers to break down this motel door and smash my computer into a million pieces, the files were immortal. They could never be deleted. They could never be altered. The irrefutable truth was now safely locked away in the digital ether, waiting for the perfect moment to be unleashed. I finally had my ammunition. The defensive phase of this nightmare was officially over. I shut the laptop, my own reflection staring back at me in the glossy black casing. The woman looking back at me was no longer a victim. It was time to go on the offensive. I sat on the sagging motel bed, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. I had the evidence securely locked away in offshore servers. But possessing the truth and weaponizing it were 2 entirely different things. I needed a strategy, a way to detonate this information so publicly and irrefutably that Desmond and his corrupt network could not bury it. I reached for my burner phone to begin mapping out local media contacts who were not on my stepfather's payroll. Before I could type a name, the burner phone vibrated. I had set up an alert tied to the precinct's public bail registry. Desmond had just checked the system. He had expected me to be sitting in a freezing cell entirely dependent on Vivian's promised commissary fund. He expected a broken, crying woman ready to sign her life away by morning. Instead, he found out his invisible stepdaughter had quietly posted a massive cash bail and vanished without a trace. The panic must have been absolute. He realized I was not playing the obedient scapegoat. I was a loose end, and loose ends needed to be snipped immediately. A shadow fell across the thin sliver of light beneath my motel room door. I froze the silence in the room, suddenly deafening. The heavy rain pounded against the window pane, making the cheap neon sign outside flicker ominously. I heard heavy footsteps pausing right outside my room. The old brass doorknob slowly clicked, turning as far as the deadbolt would allow. Someone was testing the lock. Housekeeping. A rough, deep voice called out entirely devoid of polite service industry tone. It was midnight. Housekeeping did not do rounds at midnight. Desmond had not sent the police. He could not risk me talking to anyone else. He had sent local fixers to grab my electronics, drag me back to his property, and physically intimidate me into signing that fake confession. "Open the door, Maya," a second voice demanded, laced with pure menace. "We know you are in there. Desmond just wants to talk. Make this easy on yourself." The doorknob rattled violently. A heavy shoulder slammed against the wooden frame. The wood splintered the deadbolt, groaning under the immense pressure. I had seconds before they broke through. I did not panic. The adrenaline surging through my veins felt like ice water. I shoved my encrypted laptop and physical flash drive into my waterproof duffel bag. I threw the strap over my shoulder and spun toward the back window. The men slammed into the door again, the frame cracking loudly. I grabbed the heavy metal base of the bedside lamp and smashed it directly into the window lock. The glass shattered, raining down onto the wet concrete. I kicked the rusted window screen with the heel of my boot. It gave way with a harsh metallic screech, tumbling down into the alleyway. The front door burst open just as I threw myself through the broken window frame. I landed hard on the slick, rusted grating of the fire escape, the iron biting into my knees. "She is going out the back," one of the men yelled. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the stinging pain in my legs, and sprinted down the fire escape stairs. The rain was blinding, soaking my black hoodie in seconds. I hit the alley floor, running my boots splashing through deep, muddy puddles. I did not look back, but I heard heavy boots clanging against the fire escape directly above me. I darted left, weaving through a maze of overflowing dumpsters and chain-link fences. The darkness was absolute, broken only by sudden flashes of lightning. The smell of damp asphalt and rotting garbage filled my lungs as I pushed my body to its physical limit. "Get back here," a voice roared behind me, echoing off the narrow brick buildings. I sprinted down the service road. I knew this part of the city far better than they did. I cut through a narrow gap between two abandoned warehouses, vaulting over a rotting wooden fence and tearing my jeans. I could hear them cursing loudly as they struggled to follow my path. I emerged onto a bustling, rain-slicked avenue. 2 blocks away, the neon sign of a subway station glowed. I sprinted toward it, weaving recklessly through moving traffic, ignoring the blaring horns of angry drivers. I bolted down the concrete stairs into the subterranean station, swiping my transit card and pushing hard through the turnstile. The platform was crowded with late-night commuters. I quickly blended into the mass of people, pulling my hood low over my face and keeping my duffel bag clutched tightly to my chest. I glanced over my shoulder just as the 2 fixers reached the top of the stairs. They scanned the crowd, their faces twisted in violent frustration. A train roared into the station, the doors sliding open with a hiss. I slipped inside a packed car, wedging myself between 2 large men holding umbrellas. The doors closed, sealing me safely inside. Through the glass, I watched the fixers pacing the platform, angrily pulling out their cell phones. The train lurched forward, plunging into the dark tunnel, leaving them behind. I rode the train to the opposite end of the city, disembarking in a quiet, working-class neighborhood. I walked until I found an old 2-4-hour diner that smelled strongly of burnt coffee. It was empty, save for a tired waitress and an older man sleeping in a booth. I chose a seat in the back corner facing the front doors. I slid into the cracked vinyl booth, my body shaking uncontrollably from the freezing rain and residual adrenaline. I was soaked to the bone. When my knuckles scraped my jeans torn at the knee, I ordered a black coffee and wrapped my freezing hands around the thick ceramic mug, trying desperately to stop my teeth from chattering. I had survived the night, but the reality was stark. Desmond was escalating the situation. He was willing to use physical violence to silence me permanently. I could not fight a corrupt billionaire and his hired thugs on the streets. I needed overwhelming, unstoppable power. My burner phone buzzed loudly against the table. I pulled it out, assuming it was another automated alert. Instead, it was a direct text message forwarded from my old deactivated personal number. The text was from Chloe. She attached a high-resolution photograph. It showed Darius standing in front of an ornate gilded mirror inside a luxury boutique. He was trying on a custom midnight blue tuxedo. He looked incredibly handsome and perfectly confident. Ator was adjusting his lapels while Vivian stood in the background holding a glass of champagne and smiling proudly. They looked like royalty. They looked entirely untouched by the fact that they had just left a man dying in the street and sent their own flesh and blood to be hunted like an animal. Beneath the photo was a message. "Hope you like prison food, Maya. We will be serving butter-poached lobster at the Victory Gala tomorrow night. Do not worry about the press. We are going to release a statement saying you are seeking treatment at a highly secure facility. You should have just signed the paper. Enjoy the bottom, sweetie." I stared at the glowing screen. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of her words washed over me. They were not just destroying my life. They were actively celebrating it. They were eating lobster and drinking champagne while a beloved reverend fought for his life. And I sat shivering in a dilapidated diner. They truly believed their money, their status, and their utter lack of morality made them untouchable gods in this city. I slowly set the phone down on the table. The shaking in my hands completely stopped. The fear was utterly gone. The hesitation was gone. The lingering desire to salvage my relationship with my mother was entirely eradicated. Chloe was right about one thing. I had finally reached the bottom. But the bottom is a solid foundation, and it is the absolute perfect place to build a weapon. I opened my encrypted contacts list. I scrolled past the burner numbers until I reached a name I had not contacted in 3 long years. I had stayed away because my mother had poisoned that well, convincing me that contacting him would only bring him ruin. But I was done protecting people who did not deserve it. I needed the one man in this state who possessed more power, more influence, and more ruthless integrity than Desmond could ever hope to buy. My adoptive father, the man Vivian had mocked, belittled, and abandoned because he refused to compromise his morals for cheap social climbing. The man who had legally adopted me, raised me, and taught me how to survive in a world run by predators. It was time to stop running. It was time to unleash hell. I picked up the burner phone, dialed the number, and pressed the call button. The line rang twice. On the third ring, a deep, authoritative voice answered. It commanded immediate respect, yet carried a profound warmth I had not heard in years. Harrison Caldwell speaking. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. The adrenaline, the terror of the holding cell, and the absolute heartbreak of my mother's betrayal suddenly crashed down on me. I let out a choked, trembling gasp. Maya, sweetheart, is that you? His tone shifted instantly from professional detachment to fierce paternal urgency. Maya, talk to me. Are you safe? Hearing him call me sweetheart shattered my remaining defenses. I broke down, crying out of sheer relief. I sat in the diner booth and poured out everything. I told him about Darius hitting Reverend Thomas. I explained how Desmond and Vivian ambushed me, trying to force me to take the blame to save his campaign. I told him about the corrupt local police detective Griggs, forcing a false confession and the public defender clearly on Desmond's payroll. They froze me out, Dad, I sobbed, reverting to the title he had earned decades ago. They turned the whole city against me. Desmond sent fixers to my motel room tonight to physically force me to sign the papers. I barely got away. I am sitting in a diner, and I have nowhere else to go. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line, but it was not the silence of shock or hesitation. It was the terrifying, absolute silence of a powerful man processing a declaration of war against his only daughter. What my mother and stepfather never understood was that the man they discarded 20 years ago had not remained stagnant. Vivian left Harrison because he was a modest public defender, prioritizing justice over the superficial wealth of the black elite. She called him a broke loser and moved on to Desmond's corrupt real estate empire. But Harrison Caldwell was a man of relentless drive. While Vivian hosted country club dinners and obsessed over designer labels, Harrison had quietly ascended the legal ranks. He moved from public defender to district attorney and then to an appellate judge. Now, listening to my tearful confession, Harrison sat behind a massive mahogany desk in his private chambers at the state Supreme Court. I was a state Supreme Court justice, one of the most powerful, uncompromising legal figures in the region. His reputation for ruthless integrity was legendary. He dismantled corrupt precincts and sent embezzlers to federal prison without a second thought. Desmond, in his arrogant bubble, had absolutely no idea who he had provoked. Harrison did not panic. Men of his caliber do not panic. His blood boiled, turning into liquid ice. He stood up from his leather executive chair, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished wood floor of his chambers. He looked out the window at the city skyline, his jaw clenched tightly. His daughter, the girl he had legally adopted and loved as his own flesh and blood, had been hunted through the streets like an animal by dirty cops and hired thugs. Maya, listen to me very carefully, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register. It was no longer the voice of a comforting father. It was the voice of a Supreme Court justice issuing a binding decree. I need you to take a deep breath and tell me exactly where you are right now. I wiped my eyes with the wet sleeve of my hoodie and read him the address of the diner from a menu on the table. I am at a place called Silver Star Diner on the north end of Boundary Road. I replied, my voice steadying. I have all the evidence, Dad. I hacked the car's telematics system. I have the GPS logs. I have the crash impact data. I even have the internal dashcam audio recording of Darius confessing to hitting the Reverend and plotting with Desmond to frame me. It is all safely encrypted. A dark, predatory satisfaction laced Harrison's response. Of course you do, because you are my daughter and you are brilliant. Now listen to my instructions. Do not move from that booth. Do not order anything else. Do not speak to anyone. If local police officers walk through those doors, you do not say a single word to them. You do not even look at them. They belong to Desmond. Okay, I whispered, clutching the burner phone tightly. You belong to me, Harrison stated with absolute unyielding authority. I am dispatching a tactical unit from the State Bureau of Investigation directly to your location. The FBI operates completely outside of Desmond's local jurisdiction. He cannot buy them and he cannot stop them. They will be there in 20 minutes to secure you and the evidence. Keep your head down until they arrive. We are going to tear their entire world apart. He hung up the phone. I lowered the device, letting his words wash over me. You belong to me. For the first time since my mother had dragged me into Desmond's mansion years ago, I felt a profound sense of safety. I was no longer an isolated, disposable pawn in their political games. I had just summoned the wrath of the highest court in the state. I pulled my hood down lower over my face and watched the front doors of the diner, counting every single second. Exactly 19 minutes later, the rain-soaked street outside the diner illuminated with the glare of heavy headlights. 3 black, unmarked sport utility vehicles pulled up onto the curb in a tight, synchronized formation. They moved with military precision, completely blocking the entrance to the diner and shielding it from the main road. The doors of the vehicles swung open simultaneously. 6 tall, imposing individuals stepped out into the freezing rain. They were not wearing the standard blue uniforms of the local precinct. They wore dark, tactical gear, heavy windbreakers with the bright yellow letters, SBI printed clearly across their backs and sidearms, holstered openly on their hips. Federal and state agents, the real authorities. 2 agents secured the perimeter, while 4 others strode purposefully through the glass doors of the diner. The bell chimed, cutting through the quiet hum. The very tired waitress simply froze her eyes, widening as heavily armed agents scanned the room. The lead agent, a tall woman with sharp eyes, spotted me sitting in the back corner booth. She walked directly toward me, bypassing the stunned waitress. Maya Caldwell, she asked, using my legal adopted last name, the name my mother had always hated. Yes, I replied, standing up on shaking legs. I am Special Agent Vance with the State Bureau of Investigation. She said, her tone highly professional but reassuring. Judge Caldwell sent us. We are here to bring you in safely. Are you injured? Just a few scrapes, I said, grabbing my waterproof duffel bag. But I have the evidence. We have a secure transport waiting outside, Vance said, gesturing toward the door. We need to move quickly. As we walked out of the diner, the agents formed a tight protective perimeter around me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly untouchable. Desmond's hired fixers and corrupt local cops could not touch me now. I was completely shielded by the highest level of state law enforcement. I climbed into the back of the heavily armored SUV Agent Vance, sliding into the seat beside me. The doors locked with a heavy clunk. The convoy pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the slick rain-washed traffic. Inside the warm, secure cabin of the vehicle, I unzipped my duffel bag and pulled out the physical flash drive containing all the encrypted data. I held it out to Agent Vance. This contains the GPS coordinates, the collision telemetry, and the audio confession from my brother. I told her, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. It proves everything. Desmond and Darius orchestrated the entire cover-up. Agent Vance took the flash drive carefully, placing it into a tamper-proof evidence bag. Judge Caldwell briefed the director of the bureau before we deployed, she said, securing the seal. We already have teams preparing financial warrants for Desmond's real estate holdings and your brother's campaign funds. Your father is not playing games, Ma. He is mobilizing the entire state apparatus. I leaned back against the cool leather seat, finally exhaling. My family spent the entire day trying to bury me alive. They had laughed at my pain, confidently assuming my silence could be bought. They thought they orchestrated the absolute perfect crime, but they missed the most important variable in their calculation. They forgot about the quiet, brilliant judge who raised me. The trap for Darius and Desmond was now officially set. The jaws were finally about to snap shut. The following evening arrived with a heavy, humid heat that settled over the city of Atlanta. But inside the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, the climate was perfectly controlled. The space was an absolute spectacle of manufactured wealth and hoarded privilege, dripping in gold accents and massive crystal chandeliers that caught the light of 1,000 camera flashes. This was the pinnacle event for the black elite of the city, a highly exclusive victory gala disguised as a community fundraiser. My family had spared absolutely no expense. They were celebrating a political coronation that they believed was completely secure. Waiters in crisp black and white uniforms circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with butter, poached lobster bites, and glasses of imported champagne. Standing at the center of the room, soaking in the adoration, was Darius. He was wearing the exact custom midnight blue tuxedo from the photograph Chloe had sent me. He looked like the perfect statesman. He shook hands with local business owners, smiled humbly for the press photographers, and placed his hand over his heart every time someone mentioned the tragic accident involving Reverend Thomas. He played the role of the compassionate community leader flawlessly. Watching him from the hidden security in an unmarked vehicle parked across the street made my stomach turn. He had left a man bleeding on the asphalt just 24 hours ago, and now he was drinking champagne and laughing. A few yards away from Darius, my mother and stepfather were holding court near the main ice sculpture. Vivian was draped in an emerald green silk gown, her signature pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. Desmond wore a sharp charcoal suit, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. They were putting on an award-winning performance for the mayor and several prominent donors. I could imagine the exact words pouring from my mother's mouth. She was likely accepting their deepest condolences for her deeply troubled daughter, playing the part of the heartbroken but resilient matriarch. She was using my supposed downfall to garner even more sympathy and political capital for Darius. They had completely monetized my destruction. Off to the side near the VIP lounge area, Chloe was holding a glass of sparkling wine and showing off a diamond tennis bracelet to a group of local socialites. She looked utterly triumphant. She believed she had finally eradicated the one blemish on her perfect new family. She thought I was sitting in a freezing jail cell or locked away in some psychiatric hold crying over my ruined life. She had no idea that her world was currently resting on a digital landmine with the timer counting down to 0. I sat in the back of the armored sport utility vehicle, running my hands over the fabric of my trousers. I was not wearing the cheap gray blazer from the night before. I was not wearing the damp, torn hoodie I had escaped in. My adoptive father had ensured I was dressed for a war. I was wearing a flawless, tailored white power suit. The cut was sharp, clean, and unforgiving. It felt like psychological armor. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, tight style, and my makeup was impeccable. I looked in the tinted window of the vehicle and recognized a predator staring back at me. The terrified victim who had begged for her mother's love in a holding cell was completely gone. I was the executioner now. Agent Vance sat in the front passenger seat, speaking quietly into her earpiece. She turned back to look at me, her expression intensely focused. "The perimeter is fully secured, Ma," she told me. "We have 20 undercover agents positioned throughout the hotel lobby and the main ballroom. Local security thinks they are running the show, but we have complete operational control. The judge has signed the final warrants. Whenever you are ready, we move in." I took one final deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, air-conditioned air of the vehicle. I grabbed the encrypted flash drive from my pocket, feeling the smooth metal casing against my fingertips. "I am ready," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Let us go crash a party." I stepped out of the vehicle onto the rain-slicked pavement. 2 undercover state agents immediately flanked me, dressed in sharp black suits that allowed them to blend perfectly into the high society crowd. We walked through the revolving glass doors of the Ritz-Carlton, moving with absolute purpose. The lobby was buzzing with late arrivals and hotel staff, but I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, my heartbeat with a slow, powerful rhythm. I was walking into the lion's den, but I was the one bringing the fire. As we approached the grand entrance to the main ballroom, a pair of burly private security guards stepped directly into my path. They recognized me immediately. Desmond had undoubtedly circulated my photograph among his hired muscle, with strict instructions to keep me out at all costs. The taller guard held up a thick hand, his face twisting into a menacing scowl. "You are not on the guest list, miss," he growled, taking a step forward to physically block my path. "Mr. Caldwell gave explicit orders that you are not permitted anywhere near this floor. I suggest you turn around right now before we have you arrested for trespassing." I did not even slow my pace. I did not flinch, and I did not break eye contact. Before the guard could reach out to grab my shoulder, The two agents flanking me stepped forward simultaneously. They moved with a terrifying fluid speed. The agent on my right flashed a gold State Bureau of Investigation badge directly in the security guard's face, while the other agent subtly brushed his jacket back just enough to reveal his holstered federal firearm. "State business," the agent said, his voice carrying a lethal, quiet authority. "Step aside right now, or you will be detained for interfering with an active federal investigation." The private security guard turned completely pale. The arrogant scowl vanished from his face, instantly replaced by sheer panic. He looked at the gold badge, looked at the firearm, and then looked at me. He quickly took 2 large steps backward, pulling his partner out of the way and lowering his head. We walked straight past them without breaking stride, pushing through the heavy velvet curtains that separated the lobby from the ballroom corridor. The music from the jazz band swelled louder as we entered the dimly lit hallway that ran parallel to the main event space. This corridor connected the VIP bathrooms and the staff preparation rooms to the ballroom. It was relatively offering a brief moment of isolation before stepping onto the main floor. I signaled for the 2 agents to hang back near the entrance, while I moved further down the hall to locate the audiovisual control room. As I walked past a large decorative mirror, a side door swung open. A burst of loud laughter echoed from the main room before the door clicked shut again. I stopped. Standing less than 10 feet away from me was Chloe. She had apparently stepped out of the ballroom to use the private restroom or touch up her flawless makeup. She was holding a small silver clutch, checking her reflection in the glass. She saw my reflection appear behind hers. Her body went completely rigid. She slowly turned around, her eyes wide with absolute disbelief. She looked me up and down, taking in the immaculate white suit and my calm, unbothered expression. The shock quickly morphed into an ugly, twisted rage. "What are you doing here?" Chloe hissed, her voice shaking with genuine fury. "Are you out of your mind? How did you even get past security? You are supposed to be locked up, you pathetic criminal." I stood perfectly still, watching her unravel. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of intimidation. "I am just here to enjoy the lobster, Chloe," I replied, my voice dripping with cold sarcasm. "I figured I would skip the prison food tonight." Her face turned a deep, mottled red, her hands balled into tight fists at her sides. "You have ruined enough tonight," she spat, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "This is my husband's victory, gala. We worked too hard for you to show up and embarrass us. Get out of here right now before I call the police and have you dragged out in handcuffs." She raised her hand, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the dim light of the hallway. She swung her arm, aiming a vicious, open-handed slap directly at my face. She wanted to physically put me in my place to assert her dominance the way this family had done to me my entire life. But I was not the same woman she had bullied yesterday. I moved with a speed that shocked her. I caught her wrist midair right before her hand could connect with my cheek. My grip clamped down around her delicate bones like a steel vise. I squeezed hard, pressing my thumb directly into the pressure point on her inner wrist. Chloe gasped in sudden, sharp pain, trying frantically to pull her arm back, but I held her firmly in place. Her eyes widened with genuine fear as she realized she was entirely powerless. I leaned in close until my face was mere inches from hers. I could smell the expensive champagne on her breath. "Careful, Chloe," I whispered, my voice deadly and smooth. "You are going to need those hands to pack your bags when the federal government seizes all your assets tomorrow morning." I saw the confusion and terror flash across her eyes. She did not understand what I meant, but she could feel the absolute terrifying confidence radiating from me. I shoved her arm backward with enough force to make her stumble on her designer heels. She collided awkwardly against the decorative wall mirror, her silver clutch falling to the carpeted floor. She stared at me, rubbing her wrist, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. I did not give her another second of my time. I smoothed the lapel of my white suit, turned my back on her, and walked smoothly down the corridor. I found the heavy wooden door marked AV control room at the very end of the hall. I grasped the brass handle, pushed the door open, and stepped inside the dark equipment space. I pulled the door shut behind me and slid the heavy deadbolt firmly into place, locking myself inside. The small control room hummed with the sound of cooling fans and blinking server lights. Monitors lined the walls, displaying live camera feeds of the ballroom, and the stage where Darius was currently preparing to speak. A massive digital soundboard sat in the center of the desk, controlling every speaker and microphone in the entire venue. I walked over to the main console, pulling the encrypted flash drive from my pocket. Through the soundproof glass viewing window, I could look down upon the glittering sea of the black elite, utterly oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their heads. I smiled, running my thumb over the metal edge of the drive. The reign of Vivian and Desmond Caldwell was about to end in spectacular fashion. The heavy deadbolts slid into place with a satisfying metallic clunk. I was alone inside the audio-visual control room. The space was dark and cool. The hum of massive server racks and cooling fans provided a steady rhythm against the pounding of my heart. I calmly walked over to the main console and looked through the wide, soundproof window. The entire grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton stretched out below me like a glittering theatrical stage. The black elite of Atlanta had gathered in their finest evening wear. Women wore stunning designer gowns, and the men were dressed in tailored, sharp tuxedos. They were completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was about to open up and swallow them whole. I set my waterproof duffel bag on the floor and pulled up a rolling leather chair to the primary control desk. The venue technician had left the system logged in. He probably thought no one would dare enter a restricted area during such a high-profile event. I slid my encrypted flash drive into the main universal serial bus port. The computer screen flickered as my custom decryption program initiated. Lines of code cascaded down the monitor. I swiftly bypassed the hotel security network and seized complete control of the master soundboard. Every microphone, every speaker, and every projector screen in that massive ballroom now belonged to me. Down below, the jazz band finished their set. A polite wave of applause rippled through the crowd. The master of ceremony stepped up to the crystal podium. He tapped the microphone and asked the guests to direct their attention to the main stage. The room buzzed with anticipation. I watched my mother Vivian and my stepfather Desmond take their places at the front table. They were glowing with manufactured pride. Desmond adjusted his expensive silk tie. Vivian smiled graciously at the mayor, who was seated directly to her right. They looked like untouchable royalty. Then my brother Darius walked up the carpeted steps to the center of the stage. The applause was deafening. Wealthy donors and influential community leaders stood up to clap for the man they believed would represent their future. Darius smiled and raised his hands to quiet the crowd. He stepped up to the microphone. He looked incredibly polished in his custom midnight blue tuxedo. His posture was perfect. His charisma was dialed up to the absolute maximum. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," Darius began. His deep voice boomed through the massive surround sound speakers. I checked my audio levels on the soundboard. Everything was crystal clear. "Tonight is not just about a political campaign," Darius continued, putting a hand over his heart. "Tonight is about family. It is about the values we instill in our children. It is about protecting the legacy of our beautiful community. We are gathered here to celebrate progress, but we must also acknowledge the heavy pain that hangs over our city this evening." He paused and lowered his head. He was giving an award-winning performance. I watched his face on the high-definition monitor in front of me. Every single camera in the room was focused tightly on his sorrowful expression. He actually managed to produce a single tear which rolled down his cheek. "As many of you know, we are praying for a true pillar of our community," Darius said, his voice trembling with fake emotion. "Reverend Thomas is currently fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. He was struck down last night by a reckless and deeply troubled driver. The tragedy of this hit-and-run accident has shaken my family to its very core. We are devastated. But let me make a promise to you right here and right now. When I am elected to the city council, I will not rest until our streets are safe. I will ensure that reckless criminals are brought to swift and absolute justice, no matter who they are." The hypocrisy was so vile that it actually made my stomach turn. He was standing in front of hundreds of people demanding justice for a man he had left bleeding on the pavement just 24 hours ago. He was using the blood of an innocent community leader to secure campaign donations. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. People were nodding and wiping their eyes. The mayor stood up and clapped enthusiastically. Vivian and Desmond looked at each other with triumphant smiles. Their golden child had successfully manipulated the entire room. I placed my fingers over the master override controls on the soundboard. My hands were perfectly steady. I was not shaking anymore. I was not afraid. I selected the decrypted audio file from my flash drive and routed it directly into the primary amplifier channels. Darius raised a crystal glass of champagne high into the air. The room quieted down as the guests raised their own glasses in response to Reverend Thomas Darius, proclaimed loudly to justice and to the future of our great city. I pressed the enter key. The massive digital projector screen directly behind Darius instantly flickered from his blue campaign logo to a stark white screen. The sudden burst of bright light made Darius turn around in confusion. The guests lowered their glasses. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the ballroom. Then the audio hit. I had boosted the gain on the system, maximizing the volume to its absolute peak. The sound of a car engine revving aggressively blasted through the ballroom speakers. It was so loud that several guests in the front row physically jumped back. The screech of tires skidding across wet asphalt echoed off the gilded ceiling. Then came the loud, sickening thud of a vehicle striking a human body. The sound was visceral and horrifying. The entire ballroom froze in sudden shock. Dad. Dad, I hit someone. The voice of Darius blasted through the speakers. It was not his polished political voice. It was the frantic, hysterical screaming of a coward. The real Darius standing on the stage dropped his champagne glass. The crystal shattered against the polished wood floor, but nobody even looked down. Every single eye in the room was fixed on the stage. An old man. I just hit an old man on 4th Avenue. The audio recording continued to echo through the massive venue. I watched Vivian jump out of her seat. Her face turned the color of ash. Desmond slammed his hands down on the table, looking around frantically. No, I am not stopping. The recorded voice of Darius sobbed through the speakers. My campaign is over. My life is over. I cannot go to prison. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The mayor dropped his glass. The campaign donors stared in absolute paralyzing horror. The news reporters positioned in the back of the room immediately raised their cameras, capturing every second of the unfolding disaster. Darius backed away from the podium. He was trembling violently. He looked out at the crowd, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The pristine image he had built his entire life on was disintegrating right in front of his eyes. Then the final and most damning part of the recording played. The panic in his recorded voice shifted into cold, malicious calculation. Dad, I am taking the car to Maya and her apartment. We will say the broke stole it. She is a loser anyway. Get Mom and meet me there. We are ending this tonight. The transmission cut out with a sharp hiss of static. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. It was the kind of silence that consumes all oxygen in a room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Hundreds of people stood completely paralyzed, trying to process the horrifying reality of what they had just heard. The beloved community leader had just confessed to vehicular assault and admitted to framing his own sister in front of the entire city. Then the chaos erupted. Desmond leaped over his chair and sprinted toward the stage. "Cut the power!" he screamed at the top of his lungs, his face twisted in sheer panic. "Cut the damn power right now! Security, find the control room. Stop that recording." He waved his arms, frantically, signaling to his hired guards. The security team pushed through the bewildered crowd running toward the hallway, but I had already locked the heavy deadbolt on the control room door. They were not getting in. Darius was completely frozen on the stage. The confident, charismatic politician was gone. He looked like a terrified little boy. He grabbed his hair and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the microphone stand. The crowd was no longer looking at him with admiration. They were looking at him with profound disgust and revulsion. The local reporters started shouting questions, rushing toward the front of the stage. The mayor quickly turned his back on Vivian and signaled his security detail to escort him out of the building immediately. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with this family. The wealthy donors began setting their drinks down on nearby tables, murmuring angrily to one another, and walking quickly toward the exit doors. Vivian stood completely alone by the front table. Her emerald green silk gown suddenly looked absurd. Her carefully crafted persona of black elite superiority had been entirely pulverized. She covered her mouth with trembling hands, staring up at her golden child, who had just exposed himself as a violent, manipulative criminal. I sat in the control room, watching the absolute destruction of their empire. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. They had thrown me to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. They had planned to let me rot in a prison cell for 20 years, so they could continue throwing lavish parties and drinking expensive champagne. I reached out to the soundboard and pressed the loop button. The audio recording started over from the very beginning. The loud screech of tires ripped through the ballroom a second time. The sickening thud echoed again. The frantic, sobbing confession of Darius filled the air repeatedly, driving the final nail into the coffin of their family legacy. There was absolutely no escaping the horrifying reality of his own voice, echoing back at him without mercy. "Dad, I hit someone. I am not stopping. We will say the broke stole it." The words played over and over, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the gold-painted walls. Desmond reached the stage and grabbed Darius by the arm, trying to drag him toward the backstage exit. But Darius was too paralyzed by shock to move effectively. He stumbled over his own feet, looking out at the mass of people who now hated him. Chloe was screaming near the VIP lounge. She realized that her entire social standing, her wealth, and her carefully curated life were completely destroyed. She pointed an accusing finger at Vivian, shouting something I could not hear over the deafening loop of the audio recording. The perfect family was already turning on each other like cornered rats. I stood up from the control desk and picked up my waterproof duffel bag. The job here was done. The truth was out in the open, and it could never be put back in the box. The local police officers who were working private security for Desmond were standing near the exits, looking completely lost. Their badges and uniforms suddenly offered them no authority in this disastrous situation. They knew they could not protect a man who had just confessed to a major felony in front of the press and the mayor. I walked over to the heavy wooden door of the control room. I could hear Desmond's hired men pounding their fists against the other side of the wood, shouting for someone to open it. I smiled. They could pound on that door all night. It would not change a thing. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The two security guards almost fell into the room. They looked at my crisp white suit and my calm expression. They raised their hands aggressively, preparing to grab me. But before they could even step forward, the two undercover state agents who had escorted me into the building appeared right behind them. The agents grabbed the security guards by their collars, shoving them forcefully against the hallway wall. "Stay exactly where you are," an agent commanded, pulling his badge and his weapon. "This is an active state investigation. Do not move a single muscle." I walked past the pinned guard slowly, deliberately smoothing my crisp jacket lapel. I felt a profound sense of closure settling over me. I stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the main ballroom. The audio was still looping loudly. The crowd was in a complete frenzy. People were shouting and pushing toward the doors. I stood at the railing and looked down at the chaotic scene. Darius looked up and saw me standing there. The color completely drained from his face. He pointed a trembling finger at the balcony. Vivian followed his gaze and let out a horrified shriek. She covered her face in absolute shame and terror. Our eyes met across the massive room. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just stared at her with absolute freezing finality. The invisible daughter had just burned their entire world to the ground. I stepped fully out of the shadows of the audio-visual control room and walked to the very edge of the sweeping curved balcony. The ornate mahogany railing felt cool beneath my hands. Down below the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a sea of absolute chaos. Hundreds of faces tilted upward, following the horrified gaze of my mother and the trembling finger of my brother. The moment the crowd spotted me standing there in my immaculate white-tailored suit, a collective gasp echoed across the vast space. Every single camera in the room instantly pivoted from the stage directly up to me. The bright white flashes of professional photography equipment erupted like a violent lightning storm, capturing my face on live television feeds across the entire state. Desmond was the first to snap out of his paralyzing shock. His survival instinct kicked in, but it was fueled by pure, unhinged desperation. He realized that his carefully constructed political dynasty was crumbling into dust right in front of his major donors. His face turned a deep mottled purple. He pointed a thick, aggressive finger up at the balcony. "Arrest her," Desmond bellowed, his voice cracking with panic. He frantically waved his arms at the local police officers who were working his private security detail. "She doctored that tape. It is fake. It is a malicious deep fake created by a jealous political rival. Grab her right now. Do not let her leave this building." The corrupt local cops did not hesitate. They were on Desmond's payroll, and they knew their lucrative side jobs depended on his continued political influence. 4 uniformed officers immediately unholstered their heavy metal handcuffs and began shoving aggressively through the panicked crowd of wealthy guests. They knocked over crystal champagne flutes and pushed aside prominent socialites, making a direct beeline for the grand sweeping staircase that led up to my balcony. Vivian stepped forward to the edge of the stage. Her beautiful emerald green silk gown was stained with spilled drinks from the chaotic pushing of the crowd, but she did not care. She looked up at me with a face twisted by absolute venomous hatred. She had lost complete control of her image. "You vindictive monster!" Vivian screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing harshly over the still looping audio of my brother's hit-and-run confession. "You have ruined everything. You have destroyed your own family. You are nothing but a jealous failure." I stood perfectly still, overlooking the madness. I did not step back into the safety of the control room. I did not flinch as the heavy boots of the corrupt local police officers began pounding up the carpeted steps of the grand staircase. Instead, a cold, razor-sharp smile spread slowly across my face. I looked directly down into my mother's furious eyes. I wanted her to see that I was not the terrified, broken girl she had left in that freezing jail cell. I wanted her to understand that I was not running away anymore. The first local police officer reached the top of the landing. He reached out with a heavy hand, his face twisted into an aggressive snarl, ready to slam me against the wall, just like his colleagues had done at my apartment. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed through the venue. The massive, heavy oak double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom were violently thrown open. The tremendous sound cut cleanly through the shouting crowd and the looping audio recording like a physical shockwave. The heavy wooden doors slammed hard against the interior walls, cracking the plaster. Dozens of heavily armed State Bureau of Investigation agents swarmed into the room. They moved with terrifying, calculated military precision. They wore dark tactical gear with gold lettering across their backs. They fanned out across the massive ballroom, instantly securing every single exit and establishing an impenetrable perimeter. "State Bureau of Investigation." A commanding voice roared over a tactical megaphone. "Nobody moves a single muscle. Keep your hands where we can see them." The local police officers on the staircase froze instantly. They turned around and looked down at the overwhelming force of federal and state agents flooding the floor. The corrupt cops immediately recognized that they were hopelessly outgunned and vastly outranked. The arrogant snarls vanished from their faces. They slowly lowered their hands, dropping their handcuffs back into their utility belts, and cautiously backed away from me. They knew that making a single aggressive move right now would result in their immediate arrest. The panicked crowd of the black elite parted down the middle like the Red Sea. Wealthy donors and influential politicians scrambled to get out of the way, pressing their backs against the gold-painted walls. Walking straight through the center of the heavily armed agents was Judge Harrison Caldwell. He did not rush. He did not run. He walked with the slow, deliberate, and terrifying cadence of a man who possessed absolute, undisputed authority over every single breathing soul in that room. He wore a sharp, impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit. His posture was rigid, his shoulders broad, and his piercing dark eyes were locked dead ahead. He exuded the kind of raw, legitimate power that Desmond could never hope to buy with his dirty real estate money. Vivian stood frozen by the side of the stage, her jaw literally dropped open, the angry flush drained completely from her face, leaving her looking pale and hollow. Her eyes widened in absolute sheer terror. She recognized him immediately. It was the man she had abandoned 2 decades ago. It was the modest public defender she had mocked and belittled for lacking ambition. It was the man she called a broke loser before packing her bags and taking me into Desmond's toxic empire. But the man walking toward her now was not a struggling lawyer. He was a state Supreme Court justice. He was the physical embodiment of the law in our state, and he was currently commanding an army of elite agents who had just seized control of her entire world. I watched from the balcony as the realization crushed my mother. I could practically see the frantic calculations misfiring in her brain. She realized in one horrifying instant that her entire life of ruthless social climbing, her betrayal of me, and her desperate protection of her golden child had all culminated in bringing the wrath of her discarded ex-husband directly down upon her head. Harrison ignored the gasping whispers of the wealthy crowd. He ignored the flashing cameras of the local news reporters, who were now capturing his dramatic entrance on live television. He stepped right up to the edge of the main stage, stopping just a few feet away from where Desmond and Vivian stood, trembling. He looked at them with an expression of such profound, utter disgust that they both physically shrank backward. He looked at them like they were insignificant insects squirming under a microscope. Darius, who had been frozen in shock, finally collapsed onto his knees on the stage. The reality of his situation crushed him. He looked out at the faces of the people who had cheered for him just 10 minutes ago. They were looking at him with pure, unadulterated contempt. His political career, his marriage, and his freedom were officially gone. Harrison turned his head slightly, glancing up at the corrupt local police officers who were still hovering nervously on the staircase near me. "You local boys might want to step back," Harrison said, his deep voice vibrating with a lethal, icy calm that carried perfectly across the silent ballroom. "Unless you want to be formally indicted for obstruction of justice along with this entire miserable family," the local cops did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. They practically tripped over each other, scrambling down the stairs and moving as far away from the stage as physically possible. They raised their hands and surrendered, desperately trying to signal to the state agents that they were standing down. The entire grand ballroom was completely dead silent. The only sound was the heavy rain beating against the large glass windows outside. The immense, overwhelming power dynamic had officially and permanently shifted. Desmond was no longer the untouchable billionaire pulling the strings of the city. Vivian was no longer the untouchable matriarch of high society. Darius was no longer the golden child destined for greatness. They were simply criminals standing on a stage trapped in the blinding spotlight of their own making. Harrison looked up at me, standing on the balcony. For a brief fleeting second, the cold fury in his eyes softened. He gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent confirmation between a father and his daughter. "You did exactly what you needed to do, Maya," he was telling me. "You brought them into the light. Now, let me drop the hammer." I returned the nod, my posture perfectly straight. I felt an incredible, overwhelming surge of vindication. For years, I had allowed this family to convince me that I was small, invisible, and powerless. I had allowed them to dictate my worth. But looking down at them now, shivering and terrified under the crushing weight of the justice system, I realized they were the small ones. Their power was a fragile illusion built on lies, corruption, and the exploitation of people they deemed weaker than themselves. Desmond tried to salvage the situation. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project his usual bullying dominance, but his voice shook pathetically. "Listen here, Harrison," Desmond stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You cannot just storm into a private event like this. I know the governor. I know the chief of police. You are overstepping your jurisdiction. We have powerful friends in this city." Harrison slowly turned his attention back to my stepfather. He did not raise his voice, but his words cut through the air like a sharpened blade. "Your friends cannot save you," Desmond Harrison replied, his tone brutally dismissive. "The chief of police is currently sitting in an interrogation room across town, answering questions about the bribes you paid him. Your governor is drafting a press statement, distancing himself from your entire operation. You have no friends left. You only have a choice between cooperating with federal agents or facing the absolute maximum penalty the law allows." Vivian let out a choked, desperate sob. She reached out a trembling hand toward Harrison, trying to summon the manipulative charm she had used to control men her entire life. "Harrison, please," she begged, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "We are a family. Maya is my daughter. We just made a terrible mistake. Please do not do this to us. You know me." Harrison looked at the woman who had broken his heart and abandoned his daughter. "Yes, Vivian, I do know," he said, his voice devoid of any pity or hesitation. "And that is exactly why I signed the arrest warrants myself." The room remained completely motionless, holding its breath as the final act of their destruction began. The reign of the Caldwell family elite was officially over, and the reckoning had only just begun. Judge Harrison Caldwell turned slightly toward the lead agent of the State Bureau of Investigation. He did not break his commanding posture. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his tailored charcoal jacket and pulled out a thick stack of folded legal documents. The papers were stamped with the official seal of the state Supreme Court. Harrison handed the warrants to Agent Vance, who stepped forward with a pair of heavy steel handcuffs already unholstered in her right hand. The rhythmic clicking of the handcuffs seemed to echo through the massive ballroom, breaking the suffocating silence. "Darius Caldwell, Agent Vance," announced her voice projecting with absolute lethal clarity across the frozen crowd. "You are under arrest for vehicular manslaughter, fleeing the scene of an accident, and filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent." Two heavily armored state agents immediately flanked the stage, moving with terrifying speed. They grabbed Darius by his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket, hauling him roughly to his feet. Agent Vance did not stop there. She turned her steely gaze toward my mother and stepfather, who were now shivering uncontrollably near the crushed ice sculpture, Desmond Caldwell and Vivian Caldwell. "You are both under arrest for criminal conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and the bribery of local law enforcement officials." The facade of the perfect, untouchable family shattered instantly into a million irreparable pieces. It was not a slow decline. It was an absolute instantaneous implosion of their entire world. Chloe, who had been standing frozen near the edge of the VIP section, suddenly let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She looked at the federal agent swarming the stage, then looked at the furious, disgusted faces of the wealthy socialites surrounding her. She realized in that exact moment that the Caldwell fortune was entirely gone. The political power, the country club memberships, the designer gowns, and the luxury cars were all about to be seized by the federal government. She was married to a man going to state prison, and she was about to be dragged down into his poverty. Survival instinct kicked in raw and vicious. Chloe physically scrambled backward, putting as much distance between herself and Darius as she possibly could. She waved her hands frantically in the air, her face twisted in a mask of pure panic. "I did not know!" she shrieked, her voice cracking as she looked pleadingly at the state agents. "I swear to God, I had absolutely nothing to do with this. He lied to me. They all lied to me. I thought he was at a campaign meeting. I am not a part of this cover-up." Darius looked at his wife, his eyes wide with desperate betrayal. "Chloe," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Please do not do this. Do not speak to me." Chloe screamed back, tears of genuine terror streaming down her face. "You ruined my life. You are a monster." She reached down to her left hand and violently yanked the massive, flawless diamond engagement ring off her finger. She hurled the heavy piece of jewelry directly at Darius. The ring struck him in the chest and clattered onto the polished wood floor, spinning away into the darkness. She turned her back on her husband and ran toward the lobby doors, sobbing hysterically as she shoved her way through the disgusted crowd. The golden child was completely alone. Darius collapsed back onto his knees on the hard wooden stage. The state agents gripped his shoulders, preparing to pull his arms behind his back. The arrogant, untouchable politician, who had threatened to ruin my credit and destroy my life just 24 hours ago, was entirely gone. He was nothing but a terrified, pathetic coward facing the horrifying reality of a concrete cell. He looked up at the balcony. He looked past the flashing cameras of the local press, past the disappointed faces of his donors, and locked his tear-filled eyes directly onto mine. "Maya, please." Darius sobbed loudly, his chest heaving as tears and mucus streamed down his face, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. "Maya, please tell them to stop. You are my sister. We share the same blood. Please tell the judge to let me go. I am so sorry. I will do whatever you want. Just please do not let them put me in a cage." He was begging me. The golden boy was kneeling on a stage in front of the entire city, sobbing and begging the invisible, unwanted sister for mercy. I stood at the polished mahogany railing of the balcony, looking down at him. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no hesitation. I simply stared at the man who had left an innocent reverend bleeding on the wet asphalt. The man who had tossed my own car keys onto my coffee table and told me to take the fall. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the railing. I made sure my voice was loud, clear, and perfectly steady, so that every single person in the grand ballroom could hear my response. "Who do you think they will believe, Darius?" I asked, repeating the exact mocking words he had used against me in my apartment. "You wore your little leather driving gloves, but I had the data. Your car, your confession, your problem." Darius let out a loud, agonizing wail of despair as the state agents forcefully yanked his arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of the heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists echoed through the room. Down on the main floor, Desmond decided to fight back. As an agent moved to place him in handcuffs, the disgraced real estate mogul tried to shove the officer away, shouting that he was an important man and demanding to call his lawyers. He even reached into his pocket, frantically, offering the agents cash, proving his core corruption right in front of the authorities. The response from the state agents was swift and utterly brutal. 3 officers tackled Desmond to the carpeted floor, driving their knees into his back and pinning his face directly against the spilled champagne and shattered glass. Desmond groaned in pain as they wrenched his arms behind him, completely stripping away his lifelong aura of intimidating dominance. The billionaire developer was treated like a common street criminal. Vivian did not fight. My mother simply stood there, completely paralyzed by shame. The color had entirely drained from her face. As a female state agent stepped forward and gently but firmly secured her wrists behind her back, Vivian looked up at the balcony. Her eyes were completely hollow. She looked at me, searching for any sign of the desperate, loving daughter she had exploited for nearly 30 years. But she found nothing. I was a fortress of ice. Vivian lowered her head, weeping silently as the cold steel locked around her wrists. She tried to catch Harrison's eye one last time, a silent, pathetic plea for the mercy she had never shown me, but the judge simply turned his back on her. The public execution of the Caldwell Empire was officially complete. "Bring them out," Agent Vance commanded. The agents hauled Darius and Desmond to their feet. The heavily armed tactical team formed a protective corridor through the center of the grand ballroom. The crowd of the black elite parted ways, pressing themselves against the walls to avoid touching the disgraced family. The donors, the socialites, and the politicians watched in stunned, morbid silence as the former kings and queens of Atlanta society were forcefully marched toward the main exit. The mayor looked away in absolute disgust, already dialing his crisis management team on his cell phone. The press pool went absolutely feral. News reporters shoved their microphones forward, shouting questions about the hit and run and the political corruption. Camera flashes erupted in a blinding, continuous strobe light effect, illuminating the terrified, tear-stained faces of my brother, my mother, and my stepfather. They were paraded out of the Ritz-Carlton in the most humiliating, highly publicized perwalk in the history of the city. Their legacy was not just ruined, it was pulverized into fine dust and scattered to the wind. I stood on the balcony and watched them disappear through the heavy double doors. The blinding camera flashes faded. The shouting reporters chased the agents out into the rainy street. The massive ballroom slowly began to empty out as the shocked guests hastily gathered their coats and fled the scene of the disaster, eager to scrub any association with the Caldwell name from their social records. I turned away from the railing. The heavy, suffocating weight that I had carried on my shoulders since childhood was entirely gone. The toxic respectability politics, the constant gaslighting, the feeling of never being enough, it all vanished into the cool, conditioned air of the hotel. I walked slowly down the sweeping, carpeted grand staircase. My white tailored suit caught the dim light of the chandeliers. I moved with a light, steady grace. Judge Harrison Caldwell stood at the bottom of the stairs waiting for me. He had dismissed the remaining local security guards with a single terrifying glare. As I reached the final step, the strict, intimidating demeanor of the state Supreme Court justice melted away completely. He was just a father again. He opened his arms, and I stepped straight into his embrace. He wrapped his strong arms tightly around my shoulders, resting his chin on the top of my head. I closed my eyes, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of cedar and old books that I had missed for 2 decades. The absolute, unshakable security of his embrace grounded me. "It is over, sweetheart," Harrison whispered quietly, his deep voice rumbling against my chest. "You are safe now. They can never hurt you again." I nodded against his jacket, a single tear of pure, profound relief escaping my eye. I had walked into the fire armed only with the truth and the brilliant, meticulous skills my true father had taught me. I had burned the toxic, corrupt world of Vivian and Desmond to the bare ground. I was finally truly safe. "Let us go home, Maya," he said gently, guiding me toward the side exit, away from the lingering press. I walked out of the Ritz-Carlton by his side, stepping into the cool, rain-washed night air of Atlanta. The storm had finally broken, leaving the streets washed clean. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was the architect of my own justice, and my new life was just beginning. 6 months passed since the night the Caldwell Empire collapsed. I sat quietly in the front row of the federal courtroom gallery. The heavy oak benches felt solid and grounding beneath me. My adoptive father, Harrison, sat directly to my right. He wore a simple, tailored suit today rather than his judicial robes, but his presence still commanded the entire room. He reached over and gave my hand a firm, reassuring squeeze as the federal judge entered the courtroom. We watched as Darius was led out from the holding area. My brother was completely unrecognizable. The sharp custom suits and arrogant political swagger were gone. He wore a faded orange prison uniform. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes hollow and darting nervously around the room. He looked absolutely terrified. The judge did not show him an ounce of leniency. Because of the overwhelming digital evidence I had secured, combined with his attempt to frame an innocent person, the court handed down a devastating sentence. Darius was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. He wept openly as the bailiffs escorted him away, but I felt no pity. He was finally facing the consequences he had spent his entire life avoiding. There was one bright light in the tragedy he caused. Reverend Thomas survived the horrific hit and run. He woke from his coma shortly after the arrests and was currently undergoing extensive physical therapy. His road to recovery would be long and incredibly expensive, but he would not have to worry about the financial burden. I had quietly taken the remainder of my offshore emergency fund and anonymously donated